You're at the sink, and somewhere between rinsing a plate and holding it under the water for 6 straight minutes, you've won a confrontation with a person who has no idea they're in one. Or maybe you're on the bus home and somewhere past the third stop, you've just delivered the flawless cutting comeback to a remark your colleague made at lunch 2 months ago. Impeccable delivery. The whole invented audience goes quiet with respect. And then your stop chimes and you surface to find you've ridden 4 stops past yours wearing the face of someone graciously accepting an apology. If a bit of that made you glance at the door, good. Because there's a thing that runs inside a particular kind of head, and it's rarely described the way it actually works. Not the everybody drifts off thing. That isn't this. This is the thing that stops feeling like a pastime and starts feeling like an address you return to. And the reason nobody names it properly is that the people living it are usually the last to suspect a problem, since from inside it doesn't register as a problem at all, it registers as relief. So, what's the machinery actually doing while you're under? There's a circuit in your head, the default mode network, that switches on precisely when you're not attending to the world outside. The moment you stop tracking the room around you, this circuit wakes and begins producing you. Your memories, your dreads, your fantasies, your rehearsed exchanges, your invented tomorrows. It's performing exactly the job it evolved for, but in certain people, the circuit doesn't merely switch on now and then, it becomes the home channel. The mind begins ranking its own simulations above the world outside. And that's a real departure from baseline because once it happens, actual life starts arriving thin, flat, like a broadcast with a signal dropping. Professor Eli Sommer, a clinical psychologist working at Haifa University, formally described the pattern back in 2002 and named the pattern maladaptive daydreaming, a label that still doesn't quite hold the lived experience, but it's the most solid frame we have to work with. So, what was in his findings? Well, it's that maladaptive daydreaming goes far beyond distraction. People were passing hours, sometimes most of a waking day, inside stories assembled entirely in their own heads, elaborate settings, returning characters, arcs that developed across months and whole years, and nearly every one of them shared a single feature. The invented world supplied a thing the actual one had withheld. Not escape in the sneering, throwaway sense people give that word, as if you're dodging your duties. It's closer to this that the invented scenes hand people command, emotional closure or strain of closeness that stayed safe in a way living relationships hadn't. You can pause an invented conversation, you can run it again, you can have the other person finally get it in a way the flesh and blood one never fully managed. Sounds like a rather elegant piece of engineering, doesn't it? The catch, and one arrives eventually, the brain begins learning that emotional hungers can be fed from inside. And once that lesson sets hard enough, walking back into the friction of waking life begins to feel genuinely worse than remaining under. Actual people are unpredictable. Actual conversations refuse to go the way you wrote them. Closeness is frightening and gradual and demands long stretches of not knowing. The rehearsal room never treats you that way. So back you go, and people guess it wrong. It has nothing to do with being creative. Plenty of the most inventive minds alive never do this at all. And plenty of people who've never drafted a paragraph of fiction slip under compulsively every single day. It doesn't track intelligence either. The research suggests elevated absorption. The trait tied to deep immersive attention is what matters, which means the ones most drawn to this are frequently the same ones who dissolve into an album or can't finish a film without walking out genuinely shaken. They register everything at higher volume, so they built a screening room where the volume was finally theirs to set. And then comes the costliest part, the shame loop. When you're 40 minutes into a scene where you're at last saying the sentence you swallowed at age 15, you know at some level the clock is running. You know somewhere behind the scene that the world went on turning while you were away. and climbing back up carries a strange emotional residue. Hard to label, but easy to taste. And before any conscious decision gets made, you're already half submerged again. So the loop tightens, the shame feeds the craving thickens the habit, and the habit begins occupying more and more of the square footage where your actual life was meant to be running. But none of that makes this a defect, not remotely. The people who end up this way are, statistically speaking, people who at some stage required an escape door the real world hadn't installed, an escape the world owed them. Maybe home didn't feel safe, or maybe they'd spent years feeling alone inside rooms that were billed as welcoming rooms. Perhaps they simply arrived a touch too tender for the particular world that got them. And this was the most inventive yet least harmful route their nervous system could find, the only route left open. So the daydream never was the illness, it was the treatment. The live questions only whether it still earns its keep or whether it started billing you. And this is where I'd like you to genuinely pause and consider something. Plenty of people who spot themselves somewhere in this will lunge straight at repair, as though the target is deleting the inner world outright. But that isn't where the research points. And honestly, it makes little psychological sense. The aim isn't becoming somebody who never slips inside their own head. The aim is instead working out what the slipping away supplies you and then gradually, fine, probably clumsily, constructing a portion of that out here. What is that closeness you keep on imagining handing over that you never let yourself request out loud? What's the ending you keep scripting, really handing over that you never quite let yourself pursue there? What's the whole scene you keep rehearsing, readying you to finally attempt? Being able to raise entire worlds inside your own skull with emotional shading and narrative logic and characters that breathe? That's a serious capability, an honestly rare one. The people who live this most intensely are frequently carrying an enormous reserve of interior wealth that has simply never met the right channel or the right listener, the right pocket of safety to step into daylight. The sadness isn't that they imagined so completely. Somewhere along the road, they concluded that depth was only permitted while it stayed hidden. So if you sat through this video and felt a distinct, sort of quiet recognition land, not the that's interesting sort, but the sort where you briefly had to remember breathing, I want you to hear one thing stated plainly. Nothing in you needs fixing. You were adapting privately across the years with no one seeing and no one clapping. Most people can't even catch themselves doing it. Should you feel like investigating why minds construct these private rooms, describe in the comments the scenario yours keeps replaying, the argument, the reconciliation, the immaculate comeback. I read every single one of them, and so will the next person scrolling who assumed they were alone. And if my breakdowns land for you, consider subscribing so I can bring you the following one. Thank you for spending this time here. Catch you in the coming video.